Hello, welcome. I'm talking today about why women leak during lifting. Some statistics just to help put things in perspective, which surprised me. Not this one. Around 1 in 3 postpartum women experience urinary incontinence, and a nationwide sample, 43.5% of women reported urinary incontinence, and within 2 years postpartum. And then in 4 years postpartum, nearly 30% of women still reported urinary incontinence. Now, this is interesting. The next one, childbirth is the strongest risk factor, but urinary incontinence also occurs in women who have never given birth, those in high impact sports like trampolining, gymnastics, track and field, and weightlifting. Rates can be as high as 25 to 40%. 46% of women who experienced pelvic floor symptoms during exercise stopped participating in the exercise, which is so sad because movement is key to improving everything. And I understand the fear behind it, though. You worry about leaking, you worry about your pelvic floor. And I had a lot of fear around my prolapse and feeling like things were coming out of my vagina and not wanting to make things worse. So I would tense. And we're going to go into a few areas that I have learnt along the way of improving my symptoms and feeling so much better through weightlifting. These are the things that I've taken on board from other experts, and they seem to be the main 4-5 areas that I see people struggling with and why they're leaking. Now, I want you to know that just because you leak doesn't mean it's a forever thing. And there are some surprising tweaks and adjustments that you can make that will see you stop leaking. And it could be some tiny things and some tiny reasons why. And I never want you to stop doing the exercise that you love doing forward. So stick around. Number 1, breathing. Now, whether you've had a baby or not, I've noticed that when people, including myself, lift a weight, we are either bracing, holding our breath, or we are shallow breathing into our chest, or we're bearing down into our pelvic floor. Now, notice when you are, for me, if I feel vulnerable in my pelvic floor, I check my breathing first. So, for example, doing a barbell back squat. You're coming into it, you're going to hold your breath, brace, load up, down, up. Are you leaking then? Or is it the load? We want to get you to a point where you're lifting heavy, you're doing your PBs, but your breath is good. You want to think about doing some breathing exercises, upper back, and then doing your squat, breathing out when you stand, just to see if that improves things. Getting used to doing that and feeling that, seeing what works for you. Pressure management is the next one. Poor pressure shows up in our body as hernias, disc bulges, pelvic floor issues like prolapses, ab separation, which is interesting, but also very exciting, which means you can improve your pressure management. When I talk about pressure management, I'm talking about your core. Your core is formed by your back, your pelvic floor, your diaphragm, and your transverse abdominis. So this big, strong muscle that is underutilized and often is an area of weakness. A pressure problem is when you, for example, I know someone who had a child and then decided to lift a very heavy cupboard, quite newly postpartum, I think it was 6 to 8 weeks postpartum, lifted a cupboard, caused prolapse symptoms. And her frustration was that it wasn't due to the childbirth, it was due to something else that she could have controlled. Now, had she managed her pressure better, stood up, breathing out as she stood up to take the load, things may have changed. She may have had a tendency to have those prolapse issues, and then doing something like that just cause symptoms. So maybe she had a prolapse undiagnosed, which is really common because you may not have had symptoms. And then once you lifted the heavy cupboard, she had symptoms. So going into weight belts. Now, weight belts I've often seen used in the gym that I'm in. And my problem with that, and what I've heard from other people, is that most of us don't know how to brace properly in the core anyway. We don't know what it feels like to bear down in the pelvic floor. We don't know how to make sure our trunk is strong and we're tying in our breath, pelvic floor, core at the same time. So adding in a belt that cinches you into the stomach, causing pressure down into the pelvic floor, can be problematic. So learning how to brace under load effectively, tying in your core and your pelvic floor without bearing down into your pelvic floor. Try it now. You hold your breath and push down into your pelvic floor. That is bearing down. You'll notice you feel more vulnerable if you're in a low squat position, especially a wide stance squat, which is why people get told, don't do squats under load, don't do squats, if you've got a prolapse. But there's so many things that you can do to manage that and improve pressure management. Learning how to brace properly is key. Number 3, core and pelvic floor. I've mentioned that before. It's not about having a strong core. It's about having a functional, coordinated core that manages pressure and isn't tense and handles load in all planes of motion. You may find that you can do a core exercise and it feels great, but then you do something in a different plane of motion and you leak. It's just about doing movement with your core and pelvic floors, breathing out on effort to activate pelvic floor and to get your transverse abdominis, that big muscle that comes from the back all the way around to the front, firing. Because often I see an over gripping of the obliques or just not being able to feel that the lower transverse abdominis working. Getting that firing, especially when you're under load, if you feel things in your back, like when you do a squat or a deadlift, that could be the fact that you're not activating your core well and you're taking the load into your lower back, or you're doing an anterior tilt. You're arching your lower back to get into that deep squat, and it kind of is tricky to then activate your lower abs if you're in that position. Which moves me to my last final point of posture. Now, posture is everything. I'm not talking about book on your head posture, walking around like that. I am talking about, when you're sitting on a sofa or something, on a couch, you're slumped. You're pushing down into your tummy. The tension and the pressure there, when you then come up, just notice how you feel in your pelvic floor and when you leak, when you feel like you need a wee. Think about ribs over pelvis when you do your exercise. You want to think long. You want to think, pull up through your ponytail and pivot your pelvis slightly so that you're not gripping into your abs and gripping into your glutes to hold everything. I am a recovering ab gripper, glute gripper. Didn't realize this until I saw an osteo, and she said, you grip up here. I was like, oh yeah, because I need to protect my pelvic floor. Everything is on and tense because I'm so worried that all my organs are going to fall out my vagina. And if I tense everything, then hopefully that holds my leaking, which actually then causes more problems because a tense muscle isn't a strong muscle. It tends to be a weak muscle, and we need to release those tense muscles. So notice, are you gripping up into your abs? Are you sucking your belly in? Are you gripping your glutes when you stand? Notice, are you someone who can't feel their glutes firing when you're in a squat? Are you someone who can't activate their lower abs when you're doing a squat or a deadlift? Or never. You could be over gripping at the top. As soon as I realized this, within 2 weeks of not gripping my abs, putting pressure down into my pelvic floor, into my prolapse symptoms went, because I wasn't bearing down and pushing down from my rib gripping constantly all the time. So notice if that is something that you tend to do and let it go. Let the belly hang. Misalignment and tension in different muscles. Another thing for me is because I have this levator avulsion on my right side of my pelvic floor with the muscle coming off the bone. My deep hip rotator muscles on my right side were taking over, causing a shift in my pelvis. So I've made some changes. My misalignment was causing leaking and prolapse symptoms as well. So I shifted and I had a staggered stance for a period of time, doing barbell rows, doing squats, doing hip thrusts, always with the left foot slightly forward. I was using a block to activate my inner thighs so that I could actually make sure that my core was firing. And the block also helps to relax my deep hip rotator on my right so that I can actually utilize my glutes properly and my core can start firing, and massive improvements. So those 4 areas: breathing, pressure management, getting your core and pelvic floor firing and activating at the right time, and posture and releasing tension that you might be holding in your body. If you notice that you are tense, there's muscle tension everywhere, go for a massage, do some ball release work, notice if you're ab gripping. So now I'm back to you. I want you to think about when you leak, when you lift, and share. And then we can start figuring out what areas of those 4 we need to work on first. I hope this has been beneficial, and I look forward to hearing where you feel like you leak. That is the key. And then we can go from there. Bye.